Salutations, applications, and welcome to a new
Oh, that's
episode
fun.
of the Awesome Friday podcast. And
You can't
I
just
have
yeah.
been successful in making Simon laugh immediately.
you can't just cold open with that and expect me to hold it together.
I think I
Wow.
probably can.
Wow.
My name is Matthew. Laughing is Simon. Say
Wow.
hello, Simon.
Hello. Hi. Nice to speak to you all again. I hope you're all doing fine.
Yes, we were off last week, and I was thinking that we should probably do like a double-sized episode to celebrate our return, but then I was like, that seems like a lot of work. So we're talking about two movies this week.
No.
One freshly released to streaming, and the other in theaters this weekend. The first being The Batman, and the second being The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. But first, how are you, Simon? How's your 2 weeks been?
Good. I had a nice Easter. It turns out I had 4 days off instead of 3, which was a surprise because as far as we understood in my work, we didn't get Monday off until our new American company emailed us to say, "Oh, you have Monday off." I'm like, "Oh, all right, fine." So I basically spent 4 days eating and drinking as much as humanly possible, like in a really unhealthy, self-destructive way.
So
I
it
don't
was Easter, is what you're saying.
I don't have many vices left, and so when it comes to food, I'm like, oh fuck it, what else is there? I'm gonna eat this entire chocolate egg, and I'll probably regret it later, but that is what Jesus wanted. So who am I to say that that's wrong? So I ate lots of chocolate, and my wife made. I sent you a picture of the amazing ham she cooked. This honey glazed ham with scalloped potatoes. And we ate that, and then we had like cheese. We had friends over Monday for like an English tea, so like cheeses and breads and leftover ham and leftover potatoes and alcohol, and that was great. That was great. But then you going back to work, I find this is always a problem I find after Christmas as well. In fact, you've just had a big chunk of time off, so you're going to find this tomorrow. I find it really, really difficult to slot back into work after time being off, even just 4 days, and B, like non-self-destructive eating habits. Like it's now we're past Easter now. You can't just eat chocolate all day and expect to be productive.
I was gonna say you can actually just eat chocolate all day. It just has consequences, like it didn't used to.
Like I get midtime, like lunchtime. I get a 30-minute lunchtime. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll have a beer. I'm like, no, you're not going to have a beer. you need to work this afternoon. That was then. This is now. So I think if I ever won the lottery, it would be terrible for me because I'd just turn into an obese alcoholic, and I don't think there's much. There's only money and responsibility separating that from my life now. How about you? How was your time off?
It was good. It was busy. We also celebrated Easter and actually went to see, my wife and I went to see her parents, and then I went to see mine for the first time in ages. Because it turns out a raging global pandemic is pretty bad for travel. It's just a bad scene. So,
Right.
yeah, but no, it was nice, uneventful. Watched some movies. Got accredited for Hot Docs, which is an upcoming documentary festival, a big Canadian documentary festival. So should see some coverage of that on the website in the coming week or two. And interestingly, Doxa as well, which is a Vancouver-based documentary festival. It happens at roughly the same time, so I'm kind of overwhelmed with documentaries at the moment.
I have a non-documentary question for you about your break. You're from a little island called Salt Spring. What's the population of Salt Spring? Like roughly?
I don't know, 10,000?
10,000. Okay, it's not a big place.
No.
And it's very, very beautiful. And one of my happiest memories is you trying to shake my first child out of my wife by driving us up some rocky road into the woods. But my question.
Okay, just for context, they wanted to see the lookout at the top of a mountain. The only road up there is a dirt track that we drove up, and
heavily pregnant wife.
And his wife was like 9 months pregnant, basically.
Yeah, it was almost a Salt Spring birth.
Yeah.
But my question is, I went to a liquor store and I found a beautiful looking bottle of Salt Spring cider, like handmade, winter spice cider. It looked amazing, like $14. I'm never going to spend that on one bottle, but it looked beautiful. And it occurred to me that when I go out to places like this, there's always salt spring stuff everywhere, cheese and ceramics and ciders and all kinds of salt spring. There's really good salt spring honey as well. And for a tiny little island, like what happened to your island to make it such like a powerhouse of hippie production lines? Like what is it on Salt Spring that people can make all this stuff? Because I don't see the same amount of stuff coming from like Galliano cheese or any of the other islands. Like Salt Spring seems to have it completely tied down. Is it just full of like hippies making stuff?
I mean, sort of. it's it's not just hippies making stuff though. Uh, it's interesting because for those of you who live away, like Salt Spring within BC does have a big reputation for being a bit of a hippie place. Lots of weed and other things like that. But when it was sort of founded, colonized, if you will, especially by families like mine, the people started farms. It was a big farming community, and a lot of those farms have transitioned into other things. One of my aunts and uncles, before they got old, they had a huge farm that they sold, and that is now Gary Oaks Winery. Salt Spring Island Winery was their neighbor, who I used to know. Um, and lots of other places have turned into lots of other things. There's a Salt Spring Brewery. There's Salt Spring Cidery. I went to high school with the kids who now own Salt Spring Cheese Place. And it's literally just farmers looking for. It's not so much hippies. It's actually more like farmers looking for new ways to monetize
Right.
their
Yeah.
stuff, and it's
Oh,
uh it's mostly working.
and what I like as well is that it's become a bit of a brand of quality. I used to buy stuff because that's where Matt's from, and then send you a picture. Look, it's from your home.
Hmm.
Um, but it turns out I don't think I've ever bought anything from Salt Spring and it hasn't been really, really good. Like not just like fun because it's from Salt Spring. Like the cheese is fantastic. I've had not ice wine. I've had some kind of fancy liquor from Salt Spring and it was amazing. Like everything is really, really good as well. So that's
Yeah, and Salt Spring is not a sponsor of this show, just for the record.
nice. But if they
But
wanted to be,
I mean, this is the same with most any other place where there's, you know, people who care doing small batches of things,
hmm,
basically, right? Like people wanting to do it right, and they do it right. So
I really enjoy
things
your
turn out
farmers
well.
market. Your farmers market's a lot of fun. I know you're deeply involved in that over the years. I've only been once, but I really enjoyed it.
No, I was involved in the fall fair,
Oh,
not the farmers market.
oh, I'm sorry. That
So yeah, they're different
yeah,
things. The fall
different things.
fair is the the yearly fall fair. I don't know
Right.
how else to say it. Um, whereas the farmers market is like the weekly Saturday people go and sell their stuff in the park event
How close
through the
does
summer.
how close does the full fair get to like midsummer levels of slightly terrifying pagan rituals?
I mean, it's slightly terrifying because there's so many people there, but
Oh,
there's no pagan rituals to speak of.
uh,
There's just normal, you know, Anglo-normative rituals. it's
not not the bees, which
Yeah,
leads us nicely into our first
yeah.
movie today.
Well, our
Oh, that
second movie.
oh, a second. Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah,
We'll talk about that later.
yeah.
Okay.
Good. Well, that's sufficient banter, I think. um,
Well, I hope it's persuaded some listeners to go to Salt Spring if they're local, because it's not naturally the kind of place you would choose to if you're going like to an island. Like if you're gonna go to like Victoria or something. But it's definitely worth the trip. Salt Springs,
well, you say
beautiful.
that, except for that, Salt Springs' primary industry, the thing that drives all these people to make these things is tourism. Like
Oh
their
yeah, that makes
primary
sense.
industry is tourism. So
Okay.
people. This stuff is now in stores in other places because people went to Salt Spring and went, "This is really good. I wish my local
Yeah.
store carried it." And now the local stores carry it.
Yay.
So
Good.
yeah.
So, what's our first movie today? What are we talking about? Remind
Well, we're talking about a small independent film starring noted character actor Robert Pattinson. which is, I believe, called The Batman, which I believe is about a cricketer. But uh,
Oh, God. You've spent too much time with your dad this weekend, haven't you?
probably, probably. No, we're talking about Batman, the new Robert Pattinson starring, Matt Reeves directed Batman,
Mhm.
which is now available for premium rental, or in Canada, it's on Crave, and I believe it's on HBO Max in the United States. So no one
Mm.
has any excuse to, well, there's excuses to not watch it, but it's readily available now.
Yes.
Um, and it turns out it's a Batman film, and that's, I mean,
It's a Batman film.
yeah, it's yes. I mean, so the basic plot of this movie is that Batman is in his second year of Batmaning, and a new villain has emerged who is leaving riddles, and it turns out he's called the Riddler. And
Oh,
yeah, I mean, I did not watch this movie that long ago, and I'm not gonna lie, I've forgotten a lot about it.
do you know why?
It's because so it's because it's fine. It's fine.
Because it
It's
turns out,
absolutely fine.
yeah, yeah, it is. We're sounding quite negative about it, and I know I'm at a bit of a juxtaposition here because on the one hand, I love Matt Reeves. I think Matt Reeves is a spectacular director, and this is a really well directed movie. It's
Hmm.
brilliantly directed. It is also a fantastic film noir in very, very much in the Seven kind of template of modern noir. Matt Reeves can direct. I really want to see him make a full like non-franchised film noir now because it is a brilliantly shot, colored, coded film noir. But is it a good Batman movie? And for me, it falls short as a Batman movie because I don't want my Batman to be a movie that I not even can't show my kids. I can't show my wife this movie. It is Batman for me. Even though I grew up on Adam West, but I know that that was a very comedic or light take on the character. I understand the comics. I've read a lot of Batman comics. I'm a big fan of the Dark Knight. I know many people aren't, but sorry, the Dark Knight Returns is in the Frank Miller graphic novel.
Oh no, everybody, lots of people like that story.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the most influential Batman story
but
for a reason.
I don't. It's
I
been
don't
how
need it to
many years
be.
since that came out now? I don't need that to be default Batman. I
Yeah.
I want I want default Batman to have the lightness and the deftness that the animated series had, which is still dark, incredibly dark in places, but also like goofy and funny, and Batman's like not tortured. And even though, yeah, one thing you really like about this movie, I know that works quite well, is that this is the second year of Robert Pattinson being Batman. Incidentally, he also turned. It took him 14 years to turn into a bat from a vampire, a terrible vampire. But the
Do you
he
think he
the
has to look up at the sky and yell "Bat"?
oh god, Matt Reeves is Batman, every bad, and then just running away.
Yeah.
Um, I'd watch that.
Yeah.
uh, but so it is. There are parts of this where he does he misses some things, and he misses one particularly hilarious bit of Spanish grammar, but he he doesn't get everything right. And by the end of this movie, his arc is like, oh, I know I can't just be one thing. I need to be more for the people of the, which is fine, but the route to that conclusion is humorless, like completely humorless and dark and gritty. And I don't think it's helped at all by a take on the Riddler that did not work for me at all. Like I like Paul Dano as an actor. Like out of all the out of all the Batman like enemies, even more than the Joker, like the Riddler's always stood out because he for me he doesn't really care about anything. He just wants to prove that he's smarter than the world's greatest detective. He doesn't really care too much about money or death and destruction, or that's his only thing, is to show how smart he is. And he kind of enjoys the intellectual aspect of pushing Batman to the edge. And this Riddler, Paul Dano's Riddler, is a Heath Ledger Joker. I mean, he's gone
No, I.
he's, he's gone really,
eh,
oh come on, he's gone really hard on the dark aspects of this character. You don't agree?
I disagree with that particular comparison.
What? But there's even a bit where they send the same kind of video call, like shouting into camera while they like torture someone. There's one like for like scene with him screaming with a gruff voice into the camera behind a mask, and
Yeah,
sudden
I guess the
sudden like explosions of vocal like screaming. I think it's
yeah,
very similar.
I think there's some structural surface level similarities, but the Heath Ledger Joker is like the embodiment of chaos, whereas the one thing I do like about this Riddler is he's basically an indictment of all of the kind of dorks who sit in basements and rant about how they hate women on the internet. Like he's basically an indictment of incels, which I kind of like. Exactly the wrong kind of people who end up being Batman fans is who this person embodies to me, and I kind of like that take. Um, I mean, for me, I actually do think that this is a fairly good Batman film. I just fully also recognize that it's not the kind of Batman film that I personally want anymore.
Hmm.
So it's fine. Um, and the things, and that's again, that's one of the things I like about it. I like that the internet is awash with trolls and bullies who sit in dark places and rant about how about woke culture and about how what's a real Batman and all that kind of crap. And real comics fans, and the Riddler in this movie is exactly that person. And I think it's interesting that the filmmakers were like, let's make the bad guys internet commenters basically.
Mm. I,
And
I
that
I I don't really disagree with you behind his like motivations and the reasoning for that. I'm thinking I'm talking more about as an actor, as a delivery. It goes to the same places, and I think that
you're not wrong, I guess.
I think there was lots of scope for the Riddler to have a bit more humor, because like or think he's funny anyway. As the one thing I hate about internet commenters is that it proves that comedy is difficult. Like the to have him think he's hilarious with all that aspect you're talking about, but have to have him thinking that he's funny as well, but he's really like bad at that too. I
He
think that would have fit.
doesn't even
I
need to
think,
think that he's funny for me, but he does need to like be smug about it, be smug about how
yeah,
clever he is.
yeah.
And I don't, not to spoil the movie, but when the Riddler's finally caught, I think that the scene where it becomes clear that the Riddler legitimately thought that he and Batman were on the same side is super interesting.
Hmm.
And I kind of wish that's where the movie had stopped with like a short coda afterward. But instead, we get a big hero moment.
Yeah,
And I don't, like, it's not a bad sequence. The ending sequence isn't a bad sequence. It's just that, like, I don't know. I, I think it would have been more interesting to leave Batman in this place of like defeat rather than giving a hero moment at the end. And maybe that's too much of a downer. And I can also definitely see someone at Warner Brothers watching a rough cut of the movie and being like,
yeah.
add
No.
add an action scene. Just we need more action. Because the other thing I really like about this movie is that despite that Bruce Wayne is really bad at being Batman at this point, and for the world's greatest detective fails to detect a number of things, I do really like that it is basically Batman as a detective story. Those are my
Hmm.
favorite kinds of Batman stories.
Hmm.
And this is
I
an adaptation of at least one of probably the two best Batman as a detective stories. And
yeah,
I like that about it. Um, I think I think it's fine. I'm just over this version of Batman. I'm over
yeah.
super dark Batman. I actually rewatched a while ago um, Batman Forever, which
Hmm.
is a movie that I really like. But last night, actually, prior to recording this, I actually rewatched the 1989 Batman for the first time in a long time.
Hmm.
And that is an interesting movie to watch after a long time away because it is kind of weird and disjointed because it's basically a Tim Burton film and a Saturday morning cartoon smushed together. And it kind of shouldn't work. But
Yeah.
the end result is that it is both dark and weird, but also light and goofy. And I
Mhm.
kind of need Batman movies to be light and goofy again. You know what I mean?
I know
I feel
exactly what
like
you mean.
I feel like the critical reaction to Batman and Robin, despite that movie being a huge financial success, I feel like they overcorrected from that movie and we've never recovered.
Well, Batman and Robin is the most popular Batman in this house. Like, with that is the film that we go to and my kids quote, because it does feel like finally something a bit more Adam West put through the
Well,
Tim
also
Burton turntable.
also comic comic book I don't know who needs to hear this, but comic books are for children. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being an adult comic book fan, but I do think that comics are better when they are fun. And we can the debate about Batman and Robin is one for another day because I have very mixed feelings about that movie. I do think it oversteers a little bit too far into goofy for my own personal taste,
Mhm.
but also I can totally see why your kids love that movie. Like it is a fun kids
Mhm.
movie, in the way where and Batman Forever maybe doesn't go as far, but it's still light and goofy and weird, and I just need. I think it's honestly I think that's why the Marvel films end up succeeding is because on the one hand you have all these DC film bros online who complain that they're not dark or gritty or adult enough, but also those movies are fun. Like, say
Mhm.
what you will about the varying quality of Marvel films, they are all at least trying to be fun.
Mhm.
Not everything needs to be a dark, gritty deconstruction of something.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. And
I,
I think that there's a whole generation of people who mistook Frank Miller's dark, gritty take as adult, and the only way that that comics can be adult, and I kind of hate it.
it's a really interesting point you make about Tim Burton being able to mix together these crazily different styles where you've got Joker pulling out a gun from his pants that is as long as his leg, and in the same movie you've got Jerry Hall's melted face as a reveal behind the mask, and
Yeah.
there are some. I love that movie, and I remember being terrified of some parts of that movie as a kid watching from behind my fingers,
Hmm.
and yet still loving like the darkness to it. And I think I feel a bit the same way. We've talked about how Sam Raimi combines horror and humor together, and you definitely need someone like Burton or Raimi who is able to do that mix for Batman. Like, because I love Matt Reeves, but this was a humorless film, and I totally agree with you. It needs, for me personally, I really need that aspect to come back. It
I
needs to come
disagree
back.
that it was humorless, but I do think the humor in it was unintentional. So
Okay. There was humor, and it is the absolute genius that is Colin Farrell. And if you did not know he was in this movie, then you would not recognize him, not just because of the makeup, which is spectacular makeup, but
yeah, I
his.
will say the cast in this movie is absolutely stacked, but
Mhm.
I do very much appreciate that Colin Farrell seemed to understand that he was in a totally different kind of movie
Yes,
because he is dialed like all the way to 11 for most of his scenes,
so good.
and a lot of it like it's just his like thick New York Italian accent and the heavy makeup that he's wearing, and just everything he said, the way he says everything he says is so over the top. I do also love. So there's a scene immediately following the Batmobile. There's a great, to be fair, a legitimately great Batmobile chase scene in this movie.
Hmm.
Um, in which Batman it causes so much destruction and several deaths at least.
Oh, easily.
And then at the end, they like catch up with the Penguin and they ask him a question, and he's like, "You guys are wrong because you just don't speak Spanish." And he like tells them what the clue says in Spanish with correct grammar, and they're like,
Oh.
oh, like I do really like that Batman is kind of bad at being Batman, right? Like, it's a
It's
thing, right? Like, and it sounds
yeah.
weird, but like, if you were gonna dress up in a suit and go beat up lower class people, which is effectively what Batman does when he's beating up thugs on the street, like, you would need to speak Spanish in America. It's just not a question. It's a bilingual country. You would need to speak Spanish.
It did amuse me that in the first scene, first dead person, Batman walks in and he looks at like the cut on the fingers and he immediately identifies through the amount of like decomposition of this cut, like exactly what happened, and the trained pathologist doesn't see it. Batman walks in and says, "Oh, it isn't there." And yet, on the flip side, he misses like one absolute basic piece of Spanish grammar. And Colin Farrell has the absolute best time correcting Batman's Spanish grammar. Like
Yeah.
he is he's the best part of this movie, joint with probably my favorite moment of anything I've seen in any film this year was in the Batman, which is the reveal of the Batmobile. And whoever the sound designer was that decided the jet engine on the Batmobile is going to scream, like start with a low scream, and the scream gets louder before the engine kicks in. Like I went and rewatched that through the loudest headphones I had, and it is brilliant. And that Batmobile chase is fantastic. It is
Yeah.
really good. It's a great noir moment of a great noir movie, and the sound, that screaming jet comes in twice, and it's used like Matt Reeves is really clever in how he uses it, because he gives it to you and then he waits and then he gives it to you one more time, and so you recognize it, and it's just at the climactic moment of that chase. It's really good.
Yeah, and I
Very
would argue that having recently rewatched a couple of different Batman films that all basically have the same Batmobile reveal scene where someone says, we have to let's get where I'll drive, and someone says, I brought my car. Batman says, I brought my car, and then like the Batmobile appears out of darkness. This is the best version of that I've seen for
hmm
sure.
hmm
Um, I just think it's really. I know I'm just like a broken record here, but I really like that he's bad at being Batman. I really like that the movie calls out his privilege as a rich white douchebag by just not being aware that he would need to speak Spanish. Like, it's just,
hmm
like,
hmm
it really lays bare some of the movie really doesn't seem to like Batman. Like, the people who are making the movie don't really seem to like Batman, and I think that's interesting. Or at least they recognize his flaws and are calling them out constantly. So I think it's a fine movie. I don't think it's a bad movie. It's not the movie I want it to be, But the movie I want Batman to be is basically Lego Batman at this point. So
I was thinking when I came out of when I finished watching the Batman, the first thing I thought about was the pre-credits, like in Lego Batman, where Will Ferrell says, "Darkness, it's got to be dark." Yeah, and then a logo. Yeah, and
yeah,
and it's such a brilliant deconstruction of what Batman is these days. That yes, Lego Batman is the way forward. Who's your director of Aquaman? What's his name? James.
James Wan directed
So
it.
James, I love Aquaman, and I was not ready to like Aquaman. I think out of all the DC movies coming up, Aquaman 2 is my most anticipated, because Aquaman is a fun, colorful movie, and Jason Momoa really gets it as well. He gets that he's a comic book character in a comic book movie, and I think James Wan, he's from a horror background too, right? I think
Yeah, James Wan
he's
is like, The Conjuring and Saw and all kinds
right.
of stuff.
So I think he'd make a great Batman. Like, give him the reins. DC's looking for their own Kevin Feige to oversee the new owners of Warner Brothers. Want this like overlord, so give it to James Wan. Like, he's proved that he can do it. Might actually
Yeah,
be
I think
fun.
honestly, I think that I think I think part of the reason that Kevin Feige is so good at his job is that he is a producer first.
hmm
He's just a really good producer.
hmm
I think whenever we talk about like giving the reins to one of these directors. I think they do actually need someone who understands. Not that directors don't, but I think like a movie producer and someone who's a producer first, someone who's going to be able to let someone else take the creative reins of each individual project, but also guide them
Mm,
to be an overreaching thing. But I kind of don't. I don't think DC necessarily needs that. I think
mhm,
chasing Marvel's model is a mistake. I think they should just keep making weird movies, one-offs, and then occasionally tie them together. I think that
mhm,
you know, I
mm.
think they should just make every Elseworlds movie that there is. Basically, I want them to do weird stuff,
Yeah,
and I just don't need everything to be the same. Basically,
yeah.
so
And without going into spoilers, I would like to have exactly zero surprise parental links to any of the characters in any of these movies.
in
I am
particular, any links to the Wayne family.
uh,
But yes,
and the Arkham like the just enough now.
yeah, it's funny too
Okay.
because one of the other things I watched recently after watching the Batman is I went back and watched the episode of Batman the animated series that the Riddler first appears in, and it's much closer to what I want from a Batman film.
Hmm.
But that, I mean, Batman the animated series is the best Batman, so that's the whole thing.
Yeah, it really found that balance, didn't it? Really, really had this like some of the Joker scenes are incredibly dark, but still manages to find the dark humor of it all. I haven't seen Harley Quinn animated series, but apparently that gets very close to that balance. Well, it's meant to be very.
Yeah, and and I watched that when I was a kid. Like that, the Batman the animated series takes music and design cues from 1989 Batman. So
Hmm.
it came out in the 90s, so I was 12 to 15 or whatever when it was on TV or so,
Hmm.
and it's dark and gritty, but also light enough that I don't think your 11-year-old would have a problem with it.
No,
It's
we've watched some.
yeah. Anyway, so
So how many?
what do you give the Batman out of
Uh,
5?
I mean, it's difficult because it's a brilliantly directed movie that, and I love film noirs, so I really appreciate those aspects. I would love Matt Reeves to like I said, do a straight film noir. So it's a four as a noir and a two as a Batman movie. So I'm going to say three overall. How
Yeah, I'm
about
gonna
for you?
say 3 overall because I thought it was fine.
Hmm.
I recognize that it's not what I want, but it's still a well-made movie. So I think we're saying pretty much exactly the same thing. So 3 of 5.
Yes, yes, we are. Excellent.
Yeah, good. Well, that's not a segue at all to our next film, which is called The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. And Simon, why don't you give us the rundown on
But
this movie?
this movie is one of the kind of genres I really love, which is actors playing themselves as hyperreal versions of themselves, going through fake actor trauma. It's a very specific genre. So
Yep.
Nicolas Cage is uh, openly auditioning for new movies, and he gets the feeling that his career is waning, like his star is fading, and even though he's made a million movies, he still feels like his latest roles are getting away from him. There's a wonderful moment very close to the beginning where he's desperately trying to get a part and sort of open auditions in the car park and going full Cage, and he gets this feeling that his career might actually be over because he loses some opportunities, and we learn that his dedication to his career has kind of separated him. He's separated from his wife. He has a very cold or distant relationship with his daughter, who isn't the 9-year-old girl that he, in his heart, she's still this 9-year-old girl, and she doesn't respond to him like watching the movies he wants to watch and him trying to teach her. This rings home very closely, by the way, because I forced my poor daughter to watch all kinds of old movies and then explain them incessantly to her. But And he gets an offer for a super fan who wants to pay $1 million for him to go to the not the Seychelles. Where are the islands?
He goes to Mallorca in Spain.
Mallorca in Spain. Thank you. And he says no initially, but then he says yes because it feels like easy money. So he goes and spends time on this island, and it turns out Javi, played by Pedro Pascal, who is just wonderful. Turns out he is a massive Cage superfan, but he also appears to be the head of a very dangerous cartel who it looks like have kidnapped the Spanish president's daughter to make sure that to force him to not run in the election. So Nick Cage gets embroiled with uh, this dangerous situation. I'm trying not to say too much more.
I mean,
And
he's recruited by
and
the
then there's the
CIA
movie.
to spy
Yeah,
on his new friend,
yeah,
and that's about as far as we can go without giving you too many
it really is.
spoilers.
It really is. If you
Um,
watch the trailer, you'll get the idea of where this film's going to go.
yeah, but
And
um, it's very Nicolas Cage. It's very self-reflective. It's kind of a. I find it difficult. I found this movie to be when it's Nick Cage examining what it means to be Nicolas Cage. I found it to be very good. Uh, when it sort of devolves into something a bit more actiony towards the end, even though it's sort of brilliantly telegraphed and executed, it sort of became something I didn't necessarily want it to be. But it's also well done that I didn't like. That's like the minorest of complaints. Like it also wouldn't work without that section at the end. So
mm,
um, I really like this movie. I don't know how you've. We haven't really talked about it purposefully,
no, yeah,
and I really liked it. I think that Nicolas Cage is on a hell of a run, and I think it was an interesting and ultimately kind of maybe brave is the wrong word, but it's the kind of movie where you really have to engage with your. He really has to engage with himself and all of his own
hmm
idiosyncrasies,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
and his own reputation in a way that I'm not sure everyone in the world would be able to do.
yeah. That's
So honestly and openly, even though he's not playing himself. He's playing. I mean, I do think it's a small stroke of brilliance that the character in the movie is called Nick Cage, which is something like
hmm
Nick, which is just a play on how everyone always misspells his name, basically.
I
um,
would. I really liked how he. It looks so easy to play yourself, but it's incredibly hard when you're playing different versions of your hyper real self. And I feel the same way about being John Malkovich as well. Like it occurred to me a couple of years ago that when I thought about the movie being John Malkovich, in my head, Malkovich isn't in it very much because it's mainly John Cusack and Cameron Diaz jumping through like wormholes into his head. And so in my mind, Malkovich is only there like small amounts of time when he's just being John Malkovich. And then I realized he's in like 99% of this movie. But in my brain, he's so good at acting as different versions of himself that uh, in my brain, I didn't consider it to be him. And I think Nick Cage did a really, really good job of not overplaying, even though there's some really crazy moments in this. In particular, there's an imaginary element to this that is massively over the top Nick Cage that works really, really well. And I think he's really, really precise at choosing his cage level from the imaginary person to the person at the beginning who's this like desperate cage. And then we see him towards the middle and end of the movie sort of dialing everything down and being much more honest and being able to switch like when he first meets Javi and he doesn't know he's speaking to Javi. As soon as he realizes he does, he switches on like the main cage to introduce himself. I really, really enjoyed all those parts where he's playing around with different versions of himself, and they're all like somewhat fictionalized anyway. I thought he's a much better actor than people give him credit for, I think. And I haven't seen Pig, so I'm sure that my opinion of him will go even higher when I see. But
I think that he works so much that and he takes so many parts that we do. I've said this before. I've said it in particular in relation to Big, that we sort of forget that he's a great actor because he takes so much work seemingly for the money. There's actually a moment in this movie where that calls it out directly, where he's in therapy and he's like, I can't remember how she asks it, but he says like, "This is this is my job, and in any other job, if you worked really hard, people would say you're doing great. But I work so much, and people are like, stop working so hard." and,
that's a very good Nick Cage impression.
and you just yeah, it's interesting the way we think about Nicolas Cage, who is
Hmm.
in tons of movies that we herald as classics and Academy Award winning, and even in the last say 5 or 6 years, it's true, or probably 10 years. Let's be honest. He does churn out several movies a year, but what we sort of forget is that there's every year or so there's one absolute banger. Like there's always one good one. It turns out a lot of dreck. It's true, but he never shows up and gives less than 100%. And every once in a while, he makes a great choice, and you end up with a Joe or a Mandy or a Pig,
Mm.
and those ones make the rest of it worthwhile for me because he's
Hmm.
so good in those ones. And I just think it's really interesting that they were able to make this movie and make it with him, because they were apparently they were going to make it with or without him. Apparently, the backup plan was to cast Daniel Day Lewis as Nicolas Cage, which
What?
which is just
Sorry.
you didn't see that? There was an article yesterday. I'll see if I can find it for you. Yeah, they said if they couldn't get Nicolas Cage to be in the movie, they were going to just recast Nicolas Cage. Um,
As Daniel Day
with
Lewis.
they were going to try and get Daniel Day Lewis. Yeah,
Oh my!
which is
I
just
I
it's
I
just
somehow want to
perfect.
see that more.
Yeah,
Wow.
and yeah, and honestly, if I have a complaint about this movie, because I think it's really well executed, I think it's really funny, and I think it's really honest and interesting, and interestingly heartfelt as well. Like it does have a really sweet core, and if anything, I would argue that the marketing for this movie has kind of oversold how nuts it is. Because it's not,
Yeah,
it's not,
totally.
it's, if anything, my complaint is that maybe it's not quite nuts enough, you know?
Yeah, especially after the first act, which does kind of go to those places, and then it kind of eases off the craziness level in the middle third. I think I the middle third is where it lost me a bit, to be honest. I quite enjoyed the action at the end because it was him, like it was back to the hyper real stupid Cage. And the first, I really like, for the reasons I talked about a moment ago, I really like the first third where he's showing different versions of himself, imaginary and real and private and public. And the whole middle section where he's doing stuff for the CIA, and they kind of go on an acid trip, driving around town. I didn't find that particularly interesting at all, really. And so
Uh,
it
I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I don't necessarily disagree. But I really enjoyed the whole section of the movie where him and Pedro Pascal were on an acid trip. I thought that was really fun.
it's worth saying that Pedro Pascal is a national treasure, where whichever nation wants to claim him. The he is a brilliant actor. I know that's not an especially hot take, but I mean, you heard people walking out going, "Oh, that guy from The Mandalorian turns out he's a good actor."
Yeah, I
And
was gonna say
that
that
was
was on my
that
way
was
out the door.
adorable.
That's what I heard. Yeah, that guy from the
And
Mandalorian. He's really good.
what I love about him is that you can watch something like Prospect on Netflix. If you haven't seen Prospect, it's he is a very much a bad guy who fights with being bad, and he is a dangerous person in this movie, and he can play dangerous really, really well. And in this movie, he is like a goofy, absolute starstruck schoolboy, and he plays it so. He is so happy in this film. There's one moment at the end where it's at the very, very end where they have a hug, and he just grins straight into the camera. and he's like a 14-year-old who's got a new bike. It's just he is brilliant at playing both sides of that spectrum, like convincingly. So yeah, I did enjoy him in those times,
Well,
but
I think in his
I think the story lost me a bit.
his chemistry with Nicolas Cage is also spectacular. Like they clearly
Mhm.
both understand what kind of movie they're in,
Yes, yeah, totally.
and they both play it to varying degrees to exactly the right level for each individual scene. And I think again, I think it's really interesting that Nicolas Cage clearly understands that they are going for the full cage at times, and also
Hmm.
more specifically when they're not going for the full cage. But I think Pedro
Hmm.
Pascal is there at the exact right complementary level every single time.
Yeah,
So
he's a very good listener. I think great actors are the ones who listen and give, like, allow the other person to be good by giving them what they need. And I think he's that kind of actor. He's always in that space and very focused on what the other person or people are doing. He's great.
yeah, there's a famous acting technique that I can't remember what it's called. Everyone talks about the method acting is like the primary way that people act these days. But there's another one I can't remember what it's called. It's like Meisner.
Oh yeah, Meisner.
I think so. It's the one where like you focus entirely on the other performers, basically,
Hmm.
rather than focusing on your own experience. And I think it's really interesting. And I don't know if he practices that or not, but the way you're framing it makes me think about that. Because I think
So
it's a
they,
much more interesting way of performing, just because
yeah,
everyone seems to go straight method these days.
yeah, Oscar Isaac does that. I'm fairly sure because Oscar Isaac went to Juilliard, and I they pushed Meisner pretty strongly there about listening and giving back in kind. And
Hmm.
it works really well with method acting, like true method acting, not the Jared Leto bullshit that he peddles. The actual method acting. Yeah, the two are really, really complementary, and it does make for really good performance.
Hmm. So, I mean,
So yeah, I mean, I just came out this movie going, it could have been, like you say, there's so much opportunity for it to be a bit crazier and a bit less safe, and I was kind of disappointed a little bit, even though I thought it was fun. It was a really fun movie. Uh, my expectations were perhaps a bit higher.
I don't know if that my I would don't know if I would say that my expectations were higher. I would say that they were probably different based on the marketing. You know,
Hmm.
because I still think this is a good movie. I still think it's a great time at the movies. I think, like I say, I think it's really an open and honest self interrogation from Cage, and I really appreciate that.
Hmm.
Um, it's not the full Cage in the way that the movie
Yeah,
is advertised as, though.
yeah,
So
yeah.
just
That's
to
true. That's true.
realign, if people, whoever's listening to this, if you realign your expectations a little bit, I think you'll have an amazing time.
Hmm.
Personally,
It is a fun. It's a very light, fun movie as long as you know that's what it is going in. Yeah.
yeah,
So what? 3 stars for you?
4 for me. I'm gonna give
Oh,
it a
okay.
4.
It's a three for me.
Yeah, that's fine. Um, yeah, I mean,
I
I don't begrudge anyone anything about it. Basically, like
no,
there's no.
no, and it's doing really, really well. And so if this leads to Marvel finally wrapping or bringing Nick Cage's Ghost Rider back into the fold, um, then it will all have been worthwhile because
Yeah,
that's all I want from an MCU movie now. Is like they're in New York and fighting, and everyone's beaten, and they're like, "What's that sound?" And it's a motorbike. And Nick Cage is there. It's like, "Who's this dude?" Just doesn't mind. He's a skeleton on fire on a motorbike,
yeah.
and he just rolls up and he's like, "Hey, how you doing?"
Well, we have magic and demons and Egyptian gods in the MCU now, so there's plenty
Right,
of space for a vengeance demon.
right.
Yeah.
Oh God, if only that would really make my life if that happened.
Although technically, very, very technically, there is a Ghost Rider in the MCU because the other one of the other Ghost Riders appeared in Agents of Shield. So
Yeah, but the multiverse is cracked open now. Like it doesn't matter.
yeah, it's true.
You can have You can have anyone from anywhere now.
True. I would like to also just point out. So one thing that I wasn't expecting that the marketing doesn't give away at all in this movie is that in the movie Nick Cage is married, and his wife is played by Sharon Horgan, and she is really funny. She's a really funny
Mhm.
lady. I enjoy whenever she shows up in anything. And he has a daughter who's played by Lily Mosheen, who is also really good. And so I don't think I'd seen her in anything before, and I sort of came out thinking that girl really looks like Kate. It's like Kate Beckinsale and Michael Sheen had a baby. And it turns out
Oh no, really?
that is exactly what happened. She is the
Oh no!
daughter of Kate Beckinsale and
Oh
Michael
my
Sheen.
god! Now I
Uh,
can't unsee it. It's so obvious when you point it out.
yeah, and it's but she's also quite good. So yeah,
Yeah. She is.
yeah. So yeah, Unbearable Weight, 4 stars for me, 3 stars for you, and we both
Yes,
gave Batman 3 stars. So
3 stars.
that's
A
fun.
flat three.
Yeah.
Flat three across the board. Good. So what have we got coming up next week? Anything on the cards? What's in the ticket?
Nothing that I can say for sure. There's some possibilities that I don't want to jinx, and there's some other stuff that I don't think I'm allowed to talk about yet. But Hot Docs is coming up, so look for that coverage on the website. We probably won't be covering Doctor Strange until after it's in theaters if we cover it at all before streaming, because I found out that the only press screening in Canada is in Toronto, and we don't live in Toronto.
That's great. Thanks, Disney. That's great. Thanks
Yeah.
for that.
But yeah, we'll have something. There'll be something. There's always something. There's something every week.
There
So
will be something.
yeah,
We'll,
maybe
we'll...
maybe we could make it to cinemas twice in a week, and then we could talk about The Northman and Everything Everywhere All at
Oh,
Once. Can
what
you
are you
imagine?
going to see today? What are you
I don't
seeing today?
one of those two.
Oh, so
I am going to
jealous.
the movies when we're done recording, and I'm going to watch one of those two movies, depending on
Oh man.
timing and proximity.
Right.
So
Well, yes, enjoy. I'm deeply jealous for more one than the other of those movies, but I would like to see both.
yeah, me too.
Good.
Good. Well, thank you everyone for listening to us ramble about movies for an hour. We greatly appreciate it. If you like listening to us ramble about movies, please consider giving us a review, a 5-star review, in fact, on your podcasting platform of choice. We are on most of them, all the big ones, anyway. If you'd like to support us a little more directly, we do, of course, have a Patreon, Ko-fi, and PayPal, and those are all going to be linked in the show notes. And be sure to visit the website, awesomefriday.ca, for all of the rest of our content, including the aforementioned Hot Docs coverage, recent coverage of Canadian National Film. No, sorry, National. I get it backwards every time. National Canadian Film Day, and other festivals we've covered this year. Yeah, no, that's all I got. We're gonna sign off there. Thank you for listening, and thank you for joining us on this awesome Friday.
Thanks. Bye.